society. The early phase, the phase I think we're still in, is all special cases. Right? The physics of participation is much more like the physics of weather than it is like the physics of gravity. We know all the forces that combine to make these kinds of things work. There's an interesting community over here. There's an interesting sharing model over there. Those people are collaborating on open source software. But despite knowing the inputs, we can't predict the outputs yet because there's so much complexity. And so the way you explore complex ecosystems is you just try lots and lots and lots of things. And you hope that everybody who fails informatively so that you can at least find a skull on the pikestaff near where you're going. Right? And that's the phase we're in now. Just to pick one example, one I'm in love with, but it's tiny. You can find thousands of these things. There's a professor in Brazil, in Fortaleza, Vasco Furtado. And a couple of weeks ago, one of my students at NYU forwarded me this thing he'd done. It's a wiki map for crime in Brazil. Right? So if there's an assault, if there's a burglary, if there's a mugging, a robbery, a rape, a murder, you can go and put a pushpin on a Google map, and you can characterize the assault, and you start to see a map of where these crimes are occurring. Now, this is tacit information, right? Anybody who knows a town knows that there's a kind of sense of, don't go there, that street corner is dangerous, don't go in this neighborhood, be careful there after dark. But it's something society knows without society really knowing it, which is to say there's no source where you can take advantage of it. There is no single public source. And the cops, if they have that information, they're certainly not sharing. In fact, one of the things Furtado says in starting the wiki crime map was, this information may or may not exist someplace in society, but it's actually easier for me to try to rebuild it from scratch than to try and get it from the authorities who might have it now. Now, maybe this will succeed or maybe it will fail, right? The normal case of social software is still failure. Most of these experiments don't pan out. But the ones that do are quite incredible, and I hope that this one succeeds, obviously. But even if it doesn't, it's illustrated the point already, which is that someone working alone with really cheap tools has a reasonable hope of carving out enough of the cognitive surplus, enough of the desire to participate, enough of the collective goodwill of his citizens to create a resource you couldn't have imagined existing 5 years ago. So that's the answer to the question, where do they find the time, or rather, that's the numerical answer. But beneath that question was another thought, this one not a question but an observation. We were also talking in the same conversation with the TV producer. I was talking about World of Warcraft guilds. And as I was talking, I could sort of see what she was thinking, right? Right. Grown men sitting in their basement pretending to be elves, right? At least they're doing something, right? Did you ever see that episode of Gilligan's Island where they almost get off the island and then Gilligan messes up and then they don't? Right? I saw that one. I saw that one a lot when I was growing up. And every half hour that I watched that was a half an hour I wasn't posting to my blog or editing Wikipedia or contributing to a mailing list. Now, I had an ironclad excuse for not doing those things, which is none of those things existed, right? I was forced into the channel of media the way it was because it was the only option. Now it's not, and that's the big surprise. However lousy it is to sit in your basement and pretend to be an elf, I can tell you from personal experience it's worse to sit in your basement and try to figure out if Ginger or Marianne is cuter, right? And I'm willing to raise that to a general principle, right? It's better to do something than to do nothing, right? Even lolcats, right? Even cute pictures of kittens made even cuter with the addition of cute captions hold out an invitation to participation, right? When you see a lolcat, what it essentially says is, if you have some sans serif fonts on your computer, you can play this game too, right? And that's a big change, right? I could do that too. This is something that people in the media world don't understand, right? Media in the 20th century was run as a single race, consumption. How much can we produce? How much can you consume? Can we produce more and you'll consume more? And the answer to that question has generally been yes. But media is actually a triathlon. It's 3 different events. People like to consume, but they also like to produce, and they like to share. Right? And what's astonished people who are committed to the structure of the previous society prior to trying to take this surplus and do something interesting with it is that they're discovering that when people are offered the possibility to produce and to share, they'll take it up. They'll take you up on that offer. It doesn't mean that we'll never sit around mindlessly watching Scrubs on the couch. It just means we'll do it. It just means we'll do it less. Right? And this is the other thing about the size of the cognitive surplus we're talking about now. It's so large that even a small change could have huge ramifications. Let's say that everything stays 99% the same. That people watch 99% as much television as they used to, but 1% of that is carved out for producing and for sharing. The internet-connected population watches roughly 1 trillion hours of TV a year. Right? That's about 5 times the size of the U.S. Annual consumption. That is 10,000 Wikipedia projects a year worth of participation. I think that's going to be a big deal, don't you? Right. Well, the TV producer did not think this was going to be a big deal. She was not digging this line of thought. And her final question to me was essentially, isn't this all just a fad, right? Sort of the flagpole sitting of early 2000, early 21st century, right? It's fun to go out and produce and share a little bit, but then people are going to eventually realize, no, this isn't as good as doing what I was doing before, and kind of settle down. And I made a spirited argument that no, this wasn't the case, that this was in fact a big one-time shift, more analogous to the Industrial Revolution than to flagpole sitting at the other end of the scale. I'm not sure she believed me, right? The argument I was making is that this isn't the sort of thing society grows out of, it's the sort of thing that society grows into. But I'm not sure she believed me, in part because she didn't want to believe me, but also in part because I didn't have the right story yet, and now I do. I was having dinner with a group of friends about a month ago, and one of them was talking about sitting with his 4-year-old daughter, watching a DVD. And in the middle of the movie, apropos nothing, she jumps up off the couch and runs around behind the screen. It seems like a cute moment. Maybe she's going back there to see if Dora's really back there or whatever. But that wasn't what she was doing. She started rooting around in the cables. And her dad said, "What you doing?" And she stuck her head out from behind the screen and said, "Looking for the mouse." Here's what 4-year-olds know. A screen that ships without a mouse ships broken, right? Media that's targeted at you but doesn't include you may not be worth sitting still for, right? And that's what I think, that's what I'm basing my assumption that this is a one-way change, because the people who are soaking most deeply in the current environment, the people who don't have to go through the trauma that I have to go through of trying to unpack a childhood spent watching Gilligan's Island, right? Those people are reacting to the assumption that media includes consuming, producing, and sharing. It's also become my motto now. When people ask me what we're doing, and when I say we, I mean the larger society trying to figure out how to deploy this cognitive surplus. But I also mean we, especially the people in this room, the people who are working hammer and tongs at figuring out the next good idea. That's what I'm going to tell them. We're looking for the mouse. Right? We're going to look at every place that a user or a reader or a listener or a viewer has been locked out, has been served up a passive or a fixed or a canned experience, and ask ourselves, if we carved out a little bit of the cognitive surplus we now recognize we can deploy, could we make a good thing happen? And I'm betting the answer is yes. Thank you very much.